Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Better Future Channel podcast. I'm Mark Bergen, the founder of Better Future, and joining me today is William Knight and Philip Johnson. Hello, guys.
Hi.
Mark, hi. Great to be here again and looking forward to the discussion.
Now, Phil, this is your first in this series, so this is a new era that we're in here, so glad to have you with us. The conversation today is all about trade, and we're talking about trade, we're talking about talent, we're talking about technology, and we're talking about turnover. And for a lot of designers, there is no creative conversation here. This is about the business of design, and this is how you grow your practice and how you get access to scaled projects around the world. If that's of interest for you, stay. If it's not, there'll be other episodes for you about other things. Okay. Now I think we've got the disclaimer done. What I want to do is I want to drill in for both of you to actually give a bit of a profile about your trade development, industry development side. And I also just want to go do a little bit on me. I had a era where I was in government and I was meant to go and start the digital industry. And this was in the mid-90s. And what it meant was I had to take an industry that really had no shape and say, how do you scale it up so it actually becomes not a cottage industry, but becomes major enterprises, major government deals, military contracts, international trade, fiber optic cables running around. It was ridiculous how much change there was. What I learned through that is that there are businesses that are really good at small projects, and there are businesses that are absolutely set for scaled projects. And that's what we're going to go into. Now, Philip, your history, I want you to take us through it, but I want you to start with some of the recent work that you've done in the international trade development side and building the profile for, it was Denmark, I think. Was that right?
Yeah, I had a spell working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark at the Trade Council, which is a global organization based in embassies around the world that promote exports for Danish businesses. And the particular area I was involved with was design and innovation practices and architectural practices, setting out to highlight the capacity of Danish design on an international basis and promote those interventions and those capabilities.
So exactly the cohort that we're talking about, these companies who are not working on small projects inside Denmark, they're saying we're ready to work on international scaled projects and we have the skill and capacity to do it.
Exactly it. And overcoming perhaps something of a national reticence to do that on a global platform.
And it's interesting. Viewers, in the lead up to this, Philip and I were talking about engineering firms, and engineering firms seem to handle this international side very, very well. But we did reflect on the fact that there's still engineering firms, which are your local engineer who's working on housing specifications, they're working on smaller projects. And in no way are we actually saying those engineers are not relevant. What we're trying to do is actually focus on export, global scale projects, and that's our focus here. So I think the other major project that you did, Philip, was the Millennial Products Project back in the 2000-2001 period.
Yeah.
1,024 products that you took around the world with I think with Tony Blair and also William Knight. I think the two of you are on the road and out there actually showing off how.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting use of the word "was" as well there, Mark. But no, the initiative was really brought out by the Blair government. It ran from 97 through beyond 2002-3. That identified really innovative products that we could showcase both in the UK to foster that spirit of design and innovation, but also on an international stage. And that's where Will and I collaborated some years ago. But it was a very effective program. And we also distilled the lessons that these products had in common and made a program of highlighting those capabilities and what that special sauce was that hopefully companies learned from and engraved.
So that means you're really the Yoda of this call here, that we're going to pick up that wisdom that you distilled out of that. That's why we made Philip the trade envoy for Better Future. And it's so fantastic that we've got you on board there. Now,
Mark, thanks for that. I just have a slight issue with the bar being set high, but it's a challenge I'm very prepared to accept.
well, as long as you don't use it as a limbo bar, we want you to go over the top, okay? Now, William, you've got a background here that goes, as we said, from millennial products there. But before that, you started off in political science in government, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, that was even longer ago. That was before, we had that kind of seismic change in terms of attitude in the British government in 1997. But it was incredibly helpful to have that background as we went through the process of working with overseas policymakers, using promotional campaigns, developing connections at the highest possible level. And then obviously building back through the nuts and bolts of being able to help UK businesses make connections, develop trade links, and contribute to the UK economy through design, which was a really important moment.
Yep. And so the reason I'm trying to bring that in, all three of us have got government chapters. And this area around export and international trade always has a government layer to it. And so for really anybody who's actually wanting to go and develop their business, you've either got to get a stomach to go and actually work with government or employ somebody who knows how to go do it, because it's not for the faint-hearted. Government are I actually describe them as the worst mother-in-law on the planet that you could imagine, because they will tell you how to go do everything, which isn't the way that you used to do it, and it doesn't seem to add a lot of value, but they're really necessary to have in the process. Now, as well as doing that, Will, you were at London Design Festival. You were at Media 10 when they were doing 100% Design, Clerkenwell Design Week. You were also involved with Dubai Design Week there. And all of these are about international trade. But one of the interesting things about that is that the idea of design projects is the small part of a design week. It's normally about design products or about design propositions. And so it's really important that we realize that this conversation isn't particularly well catered in the global design calendar. It's very hard to find a meeting or a forum for people who are focused on trade and want to go talk about it. Whereas the film trade, they go have a whole range of meetings. The music trade, they have lots of meetings. And so this is a very new and evolving area. And I've no, Philip, when we went and ran the Design Embassy project that we did at London Design Festival, it was interesting how we were able to find lots of people who wanted to participate, and that they were talking about the free trade agreement between India, the bilateral trade that was there, talking about what was happening in mainland Europe, talking about projects in Latin America, in Africa, but it's an unusual format. And so I'm really glad that we're actually having the courage to go and actually break the ground on this. But sometimes it's a little bit lonely to be the mavericks or the pioneers who are going and doing it. So let's keep forging in now with some of the content that I've got. One of the things we've talked about, this idea of scaled projects. And Philip, I think you saw with the people who were involved with the millennial products, that there were opportunities that came up for companies, but they didn't have a handle to actually pick up the economic opportunity. That seems to be one of those really interesting things. It's like somebody wanted to buy their product, but they couldn't work out how to grab onto the product and actually do the trade. It's such an important thing that you can actually put a handle so that you can actually get that commercial trade to take place, isn't it?
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And this was maybe one of the areas where we were a little bit ahead of the game, a little bit premature in what we were doing. In that a lot of the products that we had certainly had international potential and applications in other markets, but the companies that created them weren't necessarily approaching the product development with that mindset. They weren't necessarily looking at whatever regulations and standards they may have to comply to get their product on the market. They weren't even considering perhaps potential packaging requirements that existed either. And you also have to remember, it's just worth flagging up. I mean, this was at the very early stages of the internet as well. So websites were very rudimentary.
Yep.
So I think we've become a little bit more aware of the global market in which we're operating. But I think the point is that unless a company is minded to look at the international potential very early on in the product's development, then there are going to be additional costs if they want to exploit those international markets.
And so, therefore, if we're going across to the project side, we need to make sure that people understand how to work inside the engineering documentation standards. They need to be able to work out how to do the document exchange if they're working on large projects. And these are all friction points which are going to mean that they're not acceptable to a project or are.
Yeah, I mean, the complexities are mind-boggling in terms of the compliance that exists. And that's why I think when you have companies that are comfortable operating in international markets, this is what they've sorted out well in advance. I think for anyone looking to break in, it's a huge barrier to entry, and something that I think they don't necessarily get the kind of support with that they ought to.
And this is the area where we know government agencies, trade attaches, export market development people, that they're so helpful in guiding people through that process. And that's why I recommend that people get a good relationship with somebody in your government who's involved in international trade. They're not as easy to find as you would think. So if you're having trouble finding them, maybe it's worthwhile asking Will, Phil, or myself, how do you start that journey there? Because when you've got somebody from the government, they may not be the right person, but they will know how to pass you along to the right person, either on that deal, that portfolio, as it often is, and you may find that there's multiple people there. It's such an important thing to have that government interface, because that's one of the handles. When people see that you've got a connection to the government, all of a sudden that's a confidence point. When they see that you've got the insurance documentation, that's another confidence point. When they see that you've got disclosures about who your public indemnity, who your lawyers are, then they're more handles. The last thing they want is somebody who's keen but unaware of what they don't know. So, such an important thing to do. Now, the other thing I want to go actually focus on is, and this was where I was talking to an architect last week who's involved with some huge projects in the Middle East. And we were talking about the difference of promotion. Now, normally, if there's a big project, and I think, Will, you and I saw the Heatherwick big Google complex back in, I think it was
Yeah.
2017. Now, the whole way through that project, there's been public discussion, public dialogue, and discord. The difference is if you're doing a project in the Middle East, it's more done like a theatre reveal than in the West, where it's done as part of a build confidence to sell space in the building, build confidence to go and get investment in the building, build confidence to get government behind the building. And so many of these projects that are in other countries may not actually allow you to go and actually talk about it in your social media. You can't talk about it until it's been delivered. And I think a really good example of that is Priestman Good. We see Priestman Good doing in aviation amazing projects, but you only see when the seats are installed, and you only see when the cabin fit out is installed and the airline is ready to go market it. They can't talk about the fact we're building a brand new cabin. All they can do is talk about we have built a brand new cabin. And so that's a very interesting communication phase in there as well. It can be very frustrating for people who are used to, say, an Australia, UK, European model where there's lots of early conversation and reveals, when it's more done like a theatre reveal, which is a clap of the hands, the show opens, and now the product's on display. Vastly different cultures that are in there and different ways that you need to communicate that. The other thing that I found is that in these very large projects, most designers never meet the commissioning client, which might be a crown prince, might be the King of England, it might be the King of Australia. Did you know they're the same person? There you go. There's a little fact for you. So you may not meet the commissioning client, but what you will meet is a project director, and you will also meet a unit director who is responsible for one particular unit of work in the project. And if your appetite is that you need to be speaking to the commissioner of the work, then you're not ready to work on one of these scaled projects. You need to be prepared to go and work with the project director, work with the unit managers, and make sure that you're delivering the component that you're in. Otherwise, you're not going to actually fit in with the culture of the organization, because you're a cog, you're not the machine. And that's such a big difference. Well, you probably would have seen that with various exhibitions that you've worked on. There's people who think that they need to go and own the show rather than just support the show.
Yeah, I think there are different layers, and obviously different cultures, different economies have structures which can increase the number of touch points. Sometimes trade, understanding language is a facilitator, but sometimes it's a completely different setup which needs much more time, patience, and understanding. And obviously, depending on what you're selling and what you're approaching, your price points, there's encouragement to be part of trade fairs, presentations, and the exchange of ideas and approaches. I mean, fundamentally, that's what is the forebearer of being able to do business and trade, is the ability to understand what the potential is of exchange. So
Yeah.
I think in the context of kind of trade shows, and I've just come back from Copenhagen, and the 3 days of design festival there has become incredibly international. It's actually quite rare beyond, certainly in Europe, beyond the big event in Milan, to have such an international mix and quite a focused audience. But there is a kind of decentralization model there, which I think works in that context. But in other markets, we see barriers associated with hierarchies. So I think it's a really good point.
We need to identify that these opportunities are a different category of practice. When people understand that they're getting involved with a different category of practice, they're going to feel relaxed to take a different attitude to it. And the people who succeed are the ones who take that different practice attitude. They're not very good at doing very small projects, but they're really good at being involved in these large scaled up projects. And that's such an important thing. As I've been traveling around the last couple of months, I've come across 3 different personalities of studios. And it's really interesting because all of them need this idea that you can actually work in a production unit. There's been studios who are overburdened and they've got too much work, yet they're reluctant to hire because they're not sure how much extra work there is in the pipeline. So they don't want to go and actually hire a bunch of staff, and they're really falling a little bit behind on some of the cadence and deliveries of the project. You've then got other people who have had projects they've been contracted to, but decision delays have meant that project's gone from being profitable now into unprofitable because they based themselves on billable hours. They didn't have time of project, that there was a retainer regardless of how many hours that were worked, a minimum spend condition in the contract. And then there's other people who actually just don't have enough work at all. But what they do have is they have a rendering capacity, or they have a model workshop capacity, or they have design for manufacture capacity, a 3D print shop capacity. And none of them have handles on those specialist capacities to offer to the studio that's overburdened as a production unit to do it. So when they go in to talk, they talk about we're a creative studio and this is what we do. What they're really saying is we've got a creative studio part and we've got all of these delivery units underneath us. And at the moment, I've got not enough work for my delivery units, my production capacity. Do you need some overburden production shed to us so that we can go work with you? And this is an example where industries are not working together. And if I think back to days when you had people didn't have their own studios, that they were part of a studio complex, and they might have been one of 20 tenants in a studio park. They'd just walk down the corridor and they'd do it. But now we've all got sign written windows and there's a corporate reception with sheer curtains on it and a coffee machine. We've lost that interaction, or we've lost that capacity to go and actually work out how to shed some of our excess load. And so I think it's really important that people turn around and work out how to have a conversation, like in the film industry, the B unit who shoots the B roll. They don't shoot the main film, they shoot all the supporting stuff. How can you be the B unit to go help out on a design project, alleviate some of the burden so that studio can do their unique thing, but the production heavy lifting work is being done by your team that's not earning? And I think that's really important to work out. How do we make sure that the design industry isn't going bankrupt? How do we make sure that these studios are thriving? And that all comes down to utilization of production units in your studio. And if you can't identify what production units you've got to work with local studios, you're not going to be able to work out how to do that work internationally either. And I'm thinking of something like, say, a NEOM project, which vacuumed up so many architectural practices, but then there would have been one group that was doing the modeling workshops. There would have been another group who was going and doing the on-site surveys. They would have been pooling that production work and then sharing that knowledge out. And it's so important that we encourage people to get over their ego. It doesn't always have to have your brand on it, But I don't know if you know, there were these amazing people who made the special effects in Star Wars, and then they worked on all of these other movies as well. And the movie industry gives us so much lead of how you can be a specialist production unit, get credit for it, and not necessarily be Steven Spielberg. And I think that's such an important message that we get across. Philip.
I mean, I think it's fascinating that the line you're taking there. One of the things that strikes me is whether or not we should be looking at the importance for designers in particular of building networks, both in their local areas of operation, so they can take advantage of shared resources and units that they can collaborate on, production units they can work on together, but also, whether or not internationally developing contacts with others to help perhaps overcome
Absolutely.
regulatory challenges, and to build those sorts of networks could yield real advantage and reduce cost.
I think it's such an important that people will say, I'm going to go build a network. But I'd really encourage every design studio to think about the production units that they have inside their studio, because the network should be that people know that you have a for hire capacity for this production unit. And I'm sure somebody like a Priestman Good has an amazing assembly space in London, which if they're not using it, they'd love to go and actually rent it out to somebody for 3 months so that they could go do an assembly of all of the industrial design parts that are coming in. I know when I was in Frog Design in New York, that they had a whole train set up in the office. It was that large. Now, how many times do they design a train? Not many. Could they have rented that space out to other people who are working on a car or working on a cabin interior? There's these shared resources. We need to think of them as units so that we can then monetize the units. And something I see very seldom in design studios is a chief financial officer. I know when I worked in advertising, there was always a chief financial officer who was working out how to go and monetize every part of the agency, whether it was studio, whether it was traffic, whether it was creative production. It was how do we make sure that we're getting the maximum number of revenue hours out of the team? And I think it's such a good thing for people in the design industry to be focused on that rather than just my name on the product. So we always make sure before we close out one of these that we turn around and we work out, have we missed anything? And the same, Phil, have we missed anything before we bring this to a close? It's not meant to be the encyclopedia of everything, but is there something urgent that we haven't yet got to? What's up, guys?
Well, I think, we've got an incredible context for world trade at the moment, the likes of which we haven't actually witnessed for generations. And some of the very well established structures, understanding around how international trade should and could work have really been ripped up quite recently. But I think it's still, the issues that we have been discussing about flexibility, about relationships, about policy access, about cultural understanding, all of those things are still very real. But I think it's maybe an area for us to discuss on another pod. How does this realignment really work? Where is the focus? Where is the spend? We've done a lot of thinking about the sovereign projects that are going to be presenting huge opportunities in different parts of the world as we kind of decouple from this kind of internationalism, which has predominated everything. So I think, there's a kind of micro discussion, which has been really excellent today, but it's also potentially worth us looking at the macro and some of the tools and leverages that we're going to see emerging in this kind of new context, if you like.
Yeah. So we're going to have a link to a page on the Better Future site, which is our trade launchpad. There's room for a form there. If you've got some things that you want to go discuss with Philip, William, or myself, use the form, put it in there, then we can come and we can work out how to triage those and have a chat to you. But this is about a dialogue about how do we connect our global network of studios into these global design and trade opportunities. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I'm always humbled to be in the shadows of such amazing minds.
Mark,
Matt.
thanks very much. Enjoyed it.